Chapter 12. A Fear of the Woods. The woods are lovely, dark and deep. Zip ran up the trail ahead of me. I followed him up into the darkness of the forest. As I walked, I felt that I was headed in the direction of something big. Up ahead, my destiny was waiting for me in the form that I could not see. The forest was completely silent. There was no wind. There was no life left in this forest. Instead of being the child that I had once been that feared these woods, now I was a man. I was no longer that frightened boy. I was a man that had walked 1,000 miles through the deep desert and been tempted in the vast wasteland. I had seen my own skin crack like the dry riverbeds that I passed as I walked the tops of the dunes. In the deep desert, I walked past bleached bones of white and skulls that looked up and laughed at me. I had danced with the dust devils and feasted with the carrion. There was nothing more in this life that could hurt me. As I turned the bend in the trail, ahead of me about 15 yards, Zip had stopped. He sat in the middle of the trail with his tail moving slowly back and forth like the chimes of a grandfather clock. I looked up, and on an upright 50-gallon oil barrel there sat a man. He sat perched with his feet dangling above the earth in dirty blue jeans with holes in each knee. He wore brown work boots. He wore a dirty white t-shirt with a pack of Lucky Strikes wrapped up tight in the left sleeve. He had greasy black hair that reminded me of those 1950s greaser movies. He looked to be about 24. He was thin, long, and lean. "How you doing, son?" he asked as he took a smoke that was behind his ear and placed it between his thin lips. He took out a gold Zippo and flicked it open and lit his cigarette. He then pushed the lighter back into his front pocket. "What you doing out here?" he asked as he jumped down from his seat on the old rusted-out oil barrel. I was no longer the boy. I was the man. "Just exploring with Zip." As I heard the words leaving my mouth, they were not the tone of a grown man. The voice sounded like the voice of a child. I looked down at my hands, and they were small, like those of a child. I reached up and touched my face, and it was then that I realized I was once again the boy that I used to be. Looking up at him, he appeared like a giant. I took a step back as I felt my stomach begin to hurt. "These woods ain't safe. There's danger out here," the man said as smoke seeped from the corners of his mouth. "I live just back down the trail. I've been coming out here with Zip forever." "Is that so? You must be a brave little guy," the man said as he took the smoke from his lips and held it out to me. "You want a drag?" I reached out with my little hand and took the filterless cigarette from the stranger. I held it in my hand for a moment, just staring at it. "Go ahead, big guy. Take a drag." I placed the smoke to my virgin lips and took a deep drag. As I drew the smoke into my lungs, I felt an immediate burning sensation that exploded deep inside me. I lurched forward as I began to cough like I had never coughed before. My face felt all hot, and I immediately felt like I was about to vomit. My eyes were watering, and my lungs were burning. Again, I took in a deep breath, and my lungs were set to burn. I hurled forward as I coughed so hard I felt like I had broken a rib. "Virgin lungs," the man said as he laughed. I looked at him through watery eyes with my hands on my chest. He looked like a laughing hyena as he cackled out at me, showing his yellow teeth. "It's not funny," I said as I wiped the tears from my eyes. "It really is," the man said as from behind his back he brought something around with a flashing speed. I only heard the cut of the wind as the item swung around and caught me right above my ear. There was a loud pop that I heard right before my world went black. When I began to come to, the blood from the wound on the side of my head was running down into my eye. I could smell earth and feel the soil against my face. As I squinted my eyes tight and then opened them, I realized that I was face down on the ground. There was a terrible pain in my head, but as I came around even more, I felt another sharp, burning pain. I looked back over my shoulder, and that was when I realized that the strange man was holding me down, and he was having sex with me. He was grunting loud and breathing fast as he pumped his pelvis into me from behind. I began to cry and moan, and this was when he realized I had come to. He pushed my face in the soil with his hand placed at the back of my head. I ain't no faggot. You hear me, boy? I ain't no fucking faggot. He pumped and moaned on me for about 5 minutes more before he was finished. When he was done, he got up and buttoned up his jeans. He lit a cigarette as he stared at me as I lay there in the dirt. I rolled over onto my back and pulled my jeans up. They were resting down around my ankles. I sat up and then looked at him as he stood there smoking his cigarette. As he looked down at me with cold eyes, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a buck knife. He flipped the knife open and held it down, pointed at me. Who you gonna tell, boy? What? I whispered. Who the fuck are you gonna tell? He yelled down at me as he took his smoke and flicked it at me. The cigarette hit me in the head and bounced off into the grass. I jumped back, startled at his loud outburst. My blood ran cold and I sat there with my knees drew up to my chest. I ain't gonna tell nobody, I cried. You ever seen someone gut a deer, boy? If you tell anyone, I'll catch you, and I'll hang you up from a limb by your ankles, and I'll slit your throat from ear to fucking ear. You hear me, boy? Caught in the moment, the fear reached up from out of the ground and grabbed me by the hand. I screamed as the skeleton's hands wrapped tightly around my hands with their steel grip. My fear was like cold rain that covered me completely. All a child's fear was made real in this strange man that stood before me. He was the thing under my bed, the creature in my closet. He was it. His face was everything that scared children. His laugh was the last sound a child heard as they were dragged off to hell. His black eyes watched me from the darkness. His breath smelled like the dead bodies left in a pit covered in maggots. I had come face to face with the devil. You gonna stay out of these woods, you hear me? I am the big bad wolf, and this is where I live. I'll be watching you. Whenever you're out in your backyard playing, and you feel a cold wind run up your leg, that's me. I'm gonna keep an eye on you, and if you breathe a word of this, I'll hear you. And one night when you're all warm in your bed, you will open your eyes and see me standing over you. I will drag you into the dark woods, and you will never leave again. You hear me, boy? He said to me. Yes, yes, I cried and begged for mercy. Sitting there, I pissed myself as my body shook. From that day till now, I never spoke of the man and what had happened to me in the woods that day. I had lied to myself. I made myself believe that it never happened. I sat on my back porch and never entered those woods again. I pushed the fear from my immediate thoughts, and the trauma got lost down deep inside of me. I was broken, and my fear grew in my mind like a deep splinter that infested my soul and caused pus to run from my eyes. My mother had once thought that I was my father's son. She once believed that I had raped and killed poor little Amy. I was not my father's son. I was my mother's son. We both had stared the monster in the eye. We both had had our innocence stolen, ripped away from our reaching hands. This trauma had caused me to retreat deep into my own heart, where I could cry and no one could hear. I self-medicated with drugs in an attempt to silence the screams that I heard in the night when I was all alone. I had made my mistakes, and I had paid for them tenfolds. But today I was reborn. It was painful, but I was no longer going to lie to myself. I had lied to myself my entire life. I lied and told myself that I was trash and that I deserved to rot in a prison cell. No longer, I shouted. I am not a killer. I am not a monster. I have suffered, but I was not broken. I will no longer allow the things that have been perpetrated upon me to control my life any longer. My world was still lying at the edge of the woods, and I was scared that the boogeyman was still watching from the shadows. All this time I had denied myself things in life that I deserved. I denied myself an education. I denied myself love. Fear is a powerful thing. It is the iron bars of my cell. Fear is the silence of my world and the separation of my life from the beautiful things that exist. I want to smile again. I was a long-distance runner out on the road pushing on mile after mile. I ran as the sweat ran down into my eyes, stinging them. I ran on as my legs filled with battery acid and burned. I ran right down the center of the road, following the broken golden line to some far distant destination. My lungs grew tight and still I ran on. As I ran through my life, I saw the past, present, and future. A boy with a dog held up a sign that read fear. A mile ahead, a woman held up a sign that read love. A mile further, a figure dressed in all black wearing a black mask held up a sign that only read question mark. The final man was my future, my destiny. The sign that he held up was for my destiny. It was unknown and waiting for me to sit down and think it up. Fear, love, question mark. Staring me in the face was the questions of my life. We all move through our lives seeking out purpose and our place in this world. Most of our dreams are about riches and fame. We work jobs that we hate to pay bills for things that turn to dust when all is said and done. I did not want any of those things. In my fear, I had discovered my strength. There was nothing in this world that could scare me anymore. In love, I had found hope, and it pulled me out of the darkness and educated my mind and soul. I understood the true meaning of the word love, and I had learned to love others more than myself. And then the big question mark. What was I going to do with the time left for me? Was I going to become bitter and hate the world for the lousy cards that I had been dealt? Or was I going to learn from all the mistakes that I had made and learn to cherish each moment like it was my last? I now would smile a little more. I would appreciate the small things. I would laugh a little louder. I had climbed the hill and crossed over the apex. It was all downhill from here. I sat back and just coasted. During the Great War, there was a man that lived in a tiny little village on the border of an invading country. He had lived there his entire life in his little village, and he loved his home very much. He worked the fields, and he grew wheat, and he raised cattle. In the evening, he would sit on his porch smoking his pipe, and he would thank God for the peace in his life. The man lived a good life, and he enjoyed the little things that he saw every day. In the early morning, as he milked his cows, he took the time to notice the sun as it came up over the valley. He would stand there in awe every day as he admired the handiwork of God. It was so beautiful that it caused his heart to swell, and he was thankful that he stood there in the stillness of the new day and took the time to look up. He saw it every morning, but he was still amazed at every new sunrise. He worked hard and lived his little life in peace and harmony. One cold, snowy morning, the soldiers came into his town and gathered up all the people and took them into the center of the town. There was much loud noise and screaming and crying. The soldiers took the people and stood them up against a rock wall that had stood for 1,000 years, with the snow falling softly that morning. With his back against the cold wall, the others that stood around him were crying and holding one another tightly. It was then that a beautiful girl reached out and took a hold of his hand in all that terror. She was all alone, as he was, and she did not wish to die alone. He looked into her eyes and smiled a great big smile. "Do not fear, my lovely," he said to her softly. "Do not see the fear, hate, and evil of this world. Look past it, up into the limbs of that distant oak, and rejoice. See there, quiet against the cold of the winter, a red cardinal." The girl looked, and sure enough, against the starkness of the winter snow was one small speck of red. In all this terrible cold, there was a bit of warmth. "I see it," she whispered. "The world is a beautiful place," he said as the soldiers opened fire.